Have you ever found yourself nodding along and agreeing to something you absolutely did not want to do, all just to keep the peace? Well, today we're going to dive into a fascinating psychological quirk that completely flips group agreement on its head. And trust me, the consequences range from just, an awkward dinner to some major turning points in history. So picture this. You're in a car heading to a restaurant you don't even like. Why? Because you thought everyone else wanted to go. You were just being agreeable. But then the truth slowly trickles out. Turns out nobody wanted to go there. Sound familiar? If that story rings a bell, then you, my friend, have taken a little trip to Abilene. That's what this is all about, the Abilene Paradox. It's this bizarre and super common situation where a group's final decision is something that literally not a single person in that group actually wanted to do. So, how on earth does that even happen, right? How can a whole room full of people agree to do something that not one of them wants? Let's break down the mechanics of how this thing actually works. See, here's the big twist. This paradox isn't about managing disagreement. It's actually about the mismanagement of agreement. It all stems from this really simple but powerful fear. We're afraid to rock the boat, so we suppress what we really think, assume we're the only one feeling that way, and just conform to what we think everybody else wants. It usually happens in three pretty clear stages. First, we hide what we're really feeling. Second, we jump on board with what we perceive as the group consensus, even if it's totally wrong. And then finally, the whole group ends up on this path that nobody actually wanted to be on in the first place. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so we chose a bad restaurant, big deal. But this little paradox can have absolutely monumental consequences. In fact, you can see its fingerprints all over some major historical events. Let's take a look. We're going to travel back to the end of World War II. You've got the leaders of the Allied powers, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, all meeting to map out the future of post-war Europe. I mean, the stakes just could not be any higher. And this is exactly where the paradox kicks in. See, Roosevelt and Churchill, they wanted a democratic Europe, free elections, the whole deal. Stalin, on the other hand, was all about expanding Soviet control. They all came to an agreement, but they never actually put their conflicting goals out on the table. Each one just assumed the others were basically on the same page. And the fallout from that failure to speak up, it was catastrophic. This superficial agreement, hiding these totally misaligned visions, directly paved the way for the division of Europe and decades of the Cold War. They all collectively signed off on a plan that none of them, in its final form, truly wanted. Okay, let's jump back another generation. After the absolute devastation of World War I, the Allied powers got together to hammer out the Treaty of Versailles. The hope was to build a peace that would last forever. So, the stated goal was peace and stability, but the treaty they came up with was so harsh on Germany that it had the exact opposite effect. You have to believe individual leaders had their doubts, but nobody wanted to look weak or break ranks, so they all agreed to these punitive terms that ended up fueling the very resentment and nationalism that sparked the next World War. So when you look back at these huge historical moments, you see the exact same pattern, the same core failures. A total breakdown in open communication, decisions based on completely false assumptions about what everyone else was thinking, and this deep-seated fear of a little conflict now that led to much, much bigger conflict later on. All right, so that's history on a grand scale. But the Abilene Paradox isn't just for world leaders and treaties. Let's bring it back home to right now and look at how this pattern pops up in our own lives all the time. Think about work for a second. You're in a meeting and the whole team agrees to move forward with a new strategy. Deep down, you've got serious doubts. You can see some major flaws, but you bite your tongue because everyone else seems so excited, right? You don't want to be that one person who's negative or slows everything down. Yep, that's a trip to Abilene. And then you've got the classic social version. You're with your friends, someone suggests a plan, and one by one, everyone just kind of shrugs and agrees. Before you know it, you're all doing something that no one is actually excited about, all because each person thought they were just pleasing the rest of the group. And this thing can scale all the way back up to our institutions. Governments can end up passing policies based on a perceived public consensus, often skipping over the tough, necessary debates that would have brought some real issues or reservations to light. It's the same paradox, just playing out on a massive societal stage. So we know how to spot it, which is half the battle. But the real question is, how do we stop it? How do we keep our teams, our friends, and ourselves from taking these pointless and sometimes disastrous trips to Abilene?
Well, the solutions are actually pretty simple, but they do take a bit of courage. First, you have to create an environment where it feels safe to disagree. You got to actively encourage that honest feedback. Second, check your assumptions. Actually ask questions like, hey, what are we missing here? Or is there a totally different way to look at this? And finally, just remember that disagreement isn't a threat. It's an incredible tool for making better decisions.
In the end, it really all comes down to communication. As the source material points out so well, this whole paradox is just a huge, flashing sign reminding us how important open dialogue and honest opinions really are, especially when it feels uncomfortable to share them. So I'll leave you with this to think about. Take a good look at your team at work, your family, even your circle of friends. What's the unspoken agreement that's guiding you all? And what trip to Abilene might you be on right at this very moment?